Podcast for podcasters by podcasters. Podcasting Smarter is the official podcast from Podbean, featuring podcasting interviews, best practices, and helpful tips. We're here to give you the tools, resources, product updates, and news to help you get started podcasting and keep your podcast growing.
Hello everyone. Hello and welcome. We are so excited that you're here today. My name is Norma Jean Belenke. I'm the head of events here with Podbean. And today we're joined by Lee Uehara and Andy Wang. We're so excited that they're here today. And we're talking all about being an AAPI podcaster and how to utilize and to build your podcasting community. I'm going to read our brief intro and then we'll jump in with Lee and Andy. Get ready for an incredible event today. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back, everyone, to Podcasting Smarter and our April Live event, Identity as Influence, Harnessing Your AAPI Roots to Carve Out Your Podcast Success, featuring Lee Uehara and Andy Wang. Lee is a serial podcaster and visionary behind several key initiatives, including the Asian American Podcasters Association and the Golden Crane Podcast Awards. Her work spans from multimedia content creation to advocating for AAPI voices in podcasting. Her co-founder, Andy Wang, also joins us today and is a managing partner at Running Me Capital Management and host of the Inspired Money podcast, which has been recognized and featured by Forbes. Andy's expertise blends finance with podcasting, offering a really unique perspective on achieving success and empowering the AAPI community through media. Together, their insights promise to inspire and guide podcasters to new heights. I'm so excited for today. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions like this one with top podcasters and industry experts. We also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast, so make sure to check that out as well. This is one of the many resources and events Podbean offers free of charge to empower you to launch and succeed in your podcasting journey. We also have some great events coming up later in May that are linked here in the description of today's event on everyone's favorite topic these days, AI, and how to use AI to market your podcast. Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetizing platform and home to over 640,000 podcasts. To start your podcast, head over to podbean.com today. And now we'll get started. Hi, Andy. Hi, Lee.
Hello.
Hey there, Norma G.
I'm so excited to be here with both of you today. So first off, I'd love to hear from each of you about, how the creation of the Asian American Podcasters Association came about and, what you guys do to support the community that you've built. Lee, you want to start us out?
Asian American Podcasters Association, otherwise known as AAP, started one night in February 2019 when I looked around and saw that there was a gap in the podcasting space. And I quickly turned to Andy because, funny enough, he was the only other Asian American podcaster I knew.
Oh.
Excellent qualification on my part.
And I met him at Podcast Movement, actually. And so I said, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And he was like, "Absolutely." And because based on his introduction, he's a numbers guy, and he said, "All right." And he gave us a targeted number to hit for membership and reaching out to people, and then we were on our way.
I love that.
Yeah,
Andy, let's hear your side of the story. Yeah.
Her turning to me, and if for the listeners, there may be viewers too, but I'll do air quotes. Her turning to me was I was driving in New York City and my phone rings and it's Lee. And she asks me, are you interested in starting an Asian American Podcasters Association? And I just said, okay, sure. I have no idea what that means, but okay. And then I think for the next week, I was searching for as many Asian hosted podcasts that I could find and just sending invites to people because that is not a category. Like race, ethnic background is not a category. I can't go to Apple and do a search or go to Google and do a search. So I was kind of just randomly trying to find people and just sending invites. And I think like 2 weeks later, Lee's like, well, I guess we're starting something because it seems like we're getting people into a Facebook group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes it's one of those things where we create the things in the world that we want to be part of, right? And creating that community is something where, like you said, there's no way to kind of, check in or search through Apple Podcasts, right? There's no way to jump in and be like, okay, because I mean, obviously you have a finance podcast, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but you know what category that is, right? But in terms of finding people that are within your community, no matter what that is, it's really important sometimes to make that effort and reach out and build that yourself as well. So I think the fact that the two of you came together and really, made sure that there was a home for Asian American podcasters and that there is a community is so important. And you guys have done a little bit over the years. I want to talk later about the Golden Crane Podcast Awards, but tell us a little bit more about, what you guys have done with the association, and for everybody out there, maybe who is someone who's AAPI, right? What are they going to get when they join? How are they going to connect with other podcasters?
Sure. One of the things we did was create the first Asian podcast festival. And you've heard the term before, but to us, it's the first festival where we have Asian American show hosts come on and do live episodes. So it's really it's Andy, help me out here, but it's it's the first time it's been done, and we've done it for a few years now. We're looking at doing another one soon, hopefully, fingers crossed. And then can I just circle back and share that through the work that we've done, and mainly Andy, we now have almost 800 shows in our directory.
Yeah, that's huge.
Andy.
Oh, you want me to say something? Okay. Well, one, I've been podcasting since 2017, almost every week. So I'm either insane or just very, very stubborn, maybe a little bit of both. But I'm a big fan of listening to podcasts. I'm a fan of creating a podcast. And I think with respect to being an Asian American, I love that podcasting, oftentimes the biggest obstacle between a person and launching a podcast is yourself. You're not dealing with a gatekeeper because you're not on a radio station. You don't have to pitch a producer to get on the air. As long as you have an idea and a microphone, which today could be your iPhone or smartphone, you can launch a show. And I think that what I like about just this group of Asian American podcasters or Asian podcasters is that in assembling this directory of 700 shows, it covers just about every category. So we see that it's extremely diverse. There's comedy, there's business, there's what do you call it? Culture?
Society and culture.
Society and culture. Thank you.
I love that category.
I'm still trying to figure out what that is exactly, but there are so many categories, and I feel like we check off every box. And when we do something like the Golden Crane Awards, we listen to a lot of shows, and we've seen in just 3-4 years, I think the quality is improving, the diversity is there for subject matter, and I love that it can be so niche. People can have a bird watching show. People can have you can do anything you want, and there are listeners out there who also share the creator's interest, and that's a lot of fun. So if you have a group of people, Asian Americans in this example, is that I think that visibility and having an opportunity to share one's voice and have representations extremely important. And I love podcasting as a medium because there is not that barrier, right? If you want to start a show, start a show.
Yeah, Andy, absolutely. And I love what you said about, there's no gatekeeper. And I think in some way we're all our own gatekeeper, right? If you ask any podcaster to go back and listen to their first episode, they'll say, "Oh no, please don't make me." And so, I think it's something where that getting over that initial fear of being seen, and that's really where representation plays such a big part, right? Because if you don't have that example, you don't necessarily know, or even subconsciously know, to give yourself permission, right? To do whatever it is you want to create whatever it is you want to create, whatever podcast that is. So, I think that that's a really, really important aspect as well. And Andy, I want to talk about your show a little bit. So your podcast, Inspired Money, it's kind of a big deal. So for podcasters out there, that are looking to craft content that resonates widely, what have you done that has contributed to the success of that show? Tell us a little bit about the story behind Inspired Money. I mean, obviously you guys have been featured in Forbes. That's kind of a big deal. And finance podcasting is its own niche, right? So as a creator, what was that like for you? And then, as someone who founded the Asian American Podcasters Association, like what was that like as well in terms of bringing your perspective into that genre?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that part of it does go back to just being stubborn and persistent. But I think back in 2017, that was kind of that was one of like the best practices. It was like, if you create it, they will come, and just be persistent and keep at it, and people will find you. I think that many of us as podcasters have found that that's kind of not the case. Like, we hear about like a discoverability problem in podcasting, that word of mouth is still like the way that people discover their podcasts. So it takes much longer than we hope as creators. We don't have algorithms that are driving listenership, for example, which as a blogger, like you have SEO and people will find you through the algorithm, or if you're a YouTuber, viewers will find you because the algorithm is putting your show in front of a lot of people potentially. So I think it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm proud to have some accolades and recognition, but when I look around at the space, I'm like, I'm still really small. And how do I get more listeners? I'm constantly trying to improve. So I guess as a creator, that's one of the things. It's like incremental improvement. I want to make the next show better than the last, and hope that if I keep doing it week after week, that my game is getting better, that my show is getting better. But I think it's really a practice of periodically self-reflecting. I think that there's a challenge when you're a small creator. You're doing everything. You're trying to do marketing, you're trying to do the content creation, you're trying to book the guests, you're trying to come up with themes and ideas, like what are you going to do next week? What are you going to do next month? But you do have to take some time aside to look at your show and kind of do some, I guess, market analysis to see, what are the other shows in my space? What are people doing that's interesting? How can my show be different than what's out there today? And I don't know. I think when I started, I think like all podcasters, and if you're doing interviews, like you're pretty much taking anyone who will come onto your show that you can. And when I started, probably my first 10 guests, 7 or 8 of them, I had some connection to already. I knew them either through my work or through personal networks. And then occasionally I'm just doing cold outreach and landing one. I think my second guest was a cold outreach. I heard him as a guest on another show. I was like, this would be a great fit. Made sent the cold email, got a response back really quickly. But where was I going with that? I think that it's just about trying to make your show better and trying to have some strategy and, set the time aside, because oftentimes we're just busy creating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in terms of what you said, as an independent creator at Podbean, we're really the home of independent creators. So, when you say you're trying to book guests, you're trying to, think about the show and the theme and, how you want to market it and writing your show notes, but you're actually not trying, you're doing it, right? First of all, for all the independent creators out there, it's important to remember that, you're a one-stop shop. And so, that's okay. And, for a lot of the podcasts that seem like they have overnight success, even the ones that anecdotally, appear to, they really don't. It was incremental, right? And so I think it's one of those things that's important to remember when you're thinking about how to build your podcast, how to build your brand, and the brand of your podcast. And I also love what you said about reaching out to the community that you have, right? I think a lot of people are afraid to ask, right? I think there's a big, like a psychological barrier, you know, about asking, right? And I think it's something, you know, we talk about this all the time at Podbean, especially when it comes to like interviews, interview swaps, advertising swaps, anything like that. You know, a lot of people feel like, oh, you know, this person's so big, I can't ask them to be on my show, that kind of thing. But you know, people love to talk about themselves. They really do. And that's what is so great about podcasting as a medium. It allows you as a podcaster to create that space for whatever genre or theme your show has. And so I think it is something where people are going to say yes more than you think. And it's so important to reach out and to find community, build community where you can to really support the success of your show, whether it's through guesting, whether it's through marketing, whether it's through, you know, however you're going to connect with other people on your show.
I have two things really quickly for you before you move
Yeah.
on about the reaching to your like personal
Yeah.
network. I think one of my first 20 guests was Bishop Shelby Spong, who he's a little controversial. He's kind of like, or he was almost like a Howard Stern of the Episcopal priests, because he had people who really did not like him. He ordained the first female priest in the Episcopal Church. He ordained the first openly gay priest in the Episcopal Church, and he officiated my brother's wedding.
Wow.
So through that connection, I was like, Bishop Spong, would you like to be on my podcast? And I had a great time learning about how he grew up down south with very little money, and that kind of like really drove him to want to inspire change in whatever work that he did. And by the way, that was my first in-person interview. I invited him to my office, had 2 microphones in the conference room, forgot to hit record for like the first 10 minutes, but didn't say anything. I quietly hit record. And then when I finished the interview, I divulged my secret. I was like, I screwed up at the beginning. Do you mind just re-recording the first 10 minutes? And we did that. And then the second takeaway, do something drastic, because 6 months ago, I totally revamped the format of Inspired Money from a one-on-one interview to a weekly live stream with 3 to 4 guest panelists. And that's just been a lot of fun for me to do something different. And I hope that the listeners and viewers will join me for that ride. So far, so good. Also part of that, I've been doing more on YouTube and doing video. But yeah, I think that it's the incremental changes, but then occasionally be willing just to do something crazy. Because I think in podcasting, you're allowed to do that. We're not we're not set to like a very fixed time frame, right?
Yeah.
Like you could go 30 minutes, you could go 60 minutes, you could go an hour and a half. So just experiment a lot and be willing to try different things.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time at Podbean. You know, only you are going to know what works for your show, and use the data, right? Use the data to see what's working, and don't be afraid to pivot, right? I mean, like podcasting is like the industry of pivoting. So, you know, like I mentioned, if you ask any podcaster to go back and listen to their first episode, you get like a cringe, like, oh no, don't make me, you know, because everybody's show evolves, everybody's voice evolves, I think, as their podcasting journey continues. So absolutely. I totally agree. And Lee, I want to talk a little bit about your background as well, because you have a background in journalism that you've brought into podcasting. So tell us a little bit about that and how you've been able to take those journalism skills and transfer them into podcasting as a medium.
Thank you. Can I just add something to Andy's whole thing first? So, for those watching, listening, let me show you what his hustle looks like. I said we met at that conference, but that's not true. What happened is I was in the VIP lounge. He was there. I didn't know him. And he's like interviewing people upon people. I'm like, who is this guy? Prolific. He's just capitalizing, taking advantage of the fact that podcasters are all together, and he was just batch recording. And then that's why I was like, oh, that guy. And I met him at a social, and then we went from there. But his hustle was, hey, I'm at this conference, I'm going to make the most of the time. And the characters he interviewed, I was like, what's he talking about with her? She's got some funky costume on, like this guy. So he's accomplished and he's where he's at because of all of the footwork that he did in the beginning. And that, I think, will help folks who are just like, well, what does that look like? Strategy. Well, it means just get your hustle on and get as many interviews in the hopper as you can. Anyway, journalism. Let's see. I had the equipment in my drawer. I had an ENG microphone, which is what this is. It's electric news gathering microphone. So it has a longer handle so that when it reduces handling noise when you're holding the microphone out live when you're reporting on the street and on location. So I had that in a Zoom recorder in a drawer. And one day I thought, oh, I was supposed to start a show with someone who didn't show up. And I thought, well, the equipment is still here set up. So let me just record. And I am the exact opposite of Andy. I was consistent for my very first year. I recorded faithfully on Thursdays because that was my favorite day of the week, still is. And then I'm a serial podcaster, so I have different shows on different things, and I'm behind on all of them on any given day. So there is hope for everyone out there. And so, journalism skills, I wanted to make sure that anything I put on the air, so to say, was factually correct. So I do a lot of fact checking, and because I know how to interview and reach out, I did an episode on how to spread cold butter on toast without ripping it. And so I used my journalism skills to call up the Butter Association. There is an association for everything, hence AAP. And so I called the butter people and found out what their take wasn't my tip. My one show is about, life's random tips and how to's to, make life easier and more fun. And so I that's one of the things you can do is reach out. Like Andy was saying, just call up people. If you want to know something or you need information, go to the people who have it and reach out. And here's a tip for that. You may think, oh, I'm reaching out. What if they don't answer? I've told people that is actually a gold mine. If you reach out to get comments on something and there's no answer, or I even got from that company, Blue Bottle Coffee, I think. I wanted their take, and they sent me an email that said, "We do not wish to be part of your podcast." Well, okay, I'm going to use that for years to come now. You lose, Blue Bottle. But so that in itself is an amazing part. You can say, "Oh, well, I reached out and they refused to comment," or whatever. But that shows your due diligence that you reached out to try to get or verify or confirm XYZ information. And that can also be a story. In fact, that's an awesome story. I was trying to confirm whether they really did sell a $16 bottle cup of coffee from coffee beans in some obscure part of the country world. But anyway, have I answered the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in terms of fact checking, right? Like, coming from that background, what does that mean for podcasters out there who are self-taught or who are independent, right? Because you're coming from a background of, being trained and having these specific standards as a journalist. And there is crossover into podcasting. And a lot of podcasters want to know, what goes into those skill sets, what technically qualifies as, okay, I've checked this fact, right? Or when you're listening to a podcast that's well produced by a big production company or like Radiolab, and they say fact checking by so-and-so, what does that mean?
It means that everything on that show was verified. So that goes down to when people interview others, like guests, or especially in written work, a fact checker will call that person and say, "Hey, did such and such reporter interview you? And what did you say? What was the conversation?" They want to verify that the reporter did his or her job, or their job. And the other thing you said, what does that look like? There was something else you wanted to know. What was it? Help me out here.
No, it was, what does that process look like? When you're calling someone to fact check, do you just say, "Hey, did you have this conversation?" Do you go over quotes? Like, what are some of the points of fact checking that I think podcasters who are self-taught might want to know?
Yes. Okay. So the number one thing you want to do is get the name correctly. spelled. You want to, so when you interview someone, you say, okay, great, we're going to start. You agree to be on the show. I can use it in perpetuity and I can edit it and promote it as I see fit. Yes. Okay, please state your full name and spell it for me. Okay, Lee Uehara, Leeuehara. That indicates that they have given their permission to be interviewed. It's a secret, not secret, but it's a smooth way to get that permission in case anything comes up. First, always get the name. It's so easy to bungle a name, and don't rely on previous reports. Previous reports of someone can have the wrong age, a misspelling in the name. So that's like 101. Get the name down pat. And then in terms of fact checking, like I said, you're calling up people. I mean, of course, if you're the show host and you're doing the interview, you're the fact checker for that, right? And you have it recorded. Now, the other thing is, so you check the name. There's an association for everything, and then the other thing too is, whenever, this is very key, press releases. Always confirm a press release. Always. There is a number or contact email at the top right corner of every press release. If it's done correctly, call it up and say, hey, you sent this press release. Can you tell me about it? Or, confirm it. Because occasionally there are false press releases out there, and or there's misinformation. Maybe somebody had an intern write it and there's a wrong fact in it. It depends on what you're going for in terms of the content of the press release, but always confirm it. I am surprised how many people, I write press releases all the time as part of my business, and very, very few people ever call me to confirm the information in it. And I will tell you that this is very important, because one time back in the day, there's a very famous financial services company out there. And I was looking for a job and I went to interview with them, and they said, oh, well, tell us, what would you do? And I said, well, always fact check your press releases, always. And sure enough, I didn't get hired. But sure enough, the following week, I'll never forget this. The following week, they relied on a false press release, which affected the stock market and their reputation, because they did not fact check that press release. So
Wild.
crazy. And, we're podcasters, we're independent, we're hanging out,
Yeah.
but hang out with authority and knowledge and credibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things where just because you're an independent podcaster doesn't mean you can't take yourself seriously and present your podcast and your podcasting brand with professionalism. I think that that's such a great tip as well. Because really the difference between a professional podcast and an amateur podcast is a decision, right?
Right.
At Podbean, we have monetization built into the back end. There's branded podcasts out there. If you have a small business, you can just make a podcast for your own small business, right? Whether you are a coach or a yoga teacher, or whether you're a personal finance expert, there's so many avenues. And I think it's something where that distinction is really one that the podcaster gets to decide, which is important as well. And Lee, you mentioned a little bit earlier about, the fact that you've done a lot of different podcasts, but you also have coined the term pod pause. So tell us a little bit about that.
Certainly. Before I do that, I just wanted to add one thing. If you want to say something on your show, credit the source. Say, according to blah, 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 they said la, la, la. That way, it's not only on your shoulders. Okay, pod pause. Pod pause means you're not fading like pod fade. You are just taking a pause because you have the intention to publish another episode, but life gets in the way. So you're putting your podcast on a short pause. All my shows are on pod pause, sort of. But the key to that though is always, and Norman Jean and Andy will probably agree, always let your listeners know. Like, my listeners know, oh, Lee's gonna get to an episode when she gets to it, but hang in there. It's not going away. She's just gonna publish when she can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's really important to always communicate with your listeners. And you can update the trailer episode, right? You can say, "Hey everybody, we have a new season coming out," or "Hey, we've gone on pause. We might be releasing reruns every now and again, but here's how you can support the show and we're excited to be back with you." I think it's just that communication, because it's such a bummer as somebody who loves podcasts and creates podcasts that when you are listening to a show and there's no new episodes, but you don't know why. And you don't know when you're going to get more episodes. And maybe it's been a couple of months, or maybe it's been a couple of weeks, or maybe it's been a couple of years. And you just find a really incredible show and you just don't know what happened to it. So for everybody out there who's listening, pod fade is when you kind of burn out in terms of podcasting. And this is kind of what I want to talk to both of you about next, in terms of, because Andy, you've been going weekly since 2017, and Lee, you've coined pod pause. But what do you both each do? I guess, Lee, maybe it is pod pausing, but what do you both do to prevent that pod fade in terms of affecting your enthusiasm, both as podcasters, but also maybe as people who actively have created a community within podcasting for AAPI podcasters?
Andy?
I thought she was addressing you,
Oh,
Lee.
It's both of you, actually. Yeah.
The question is basically how to keep going?
Yeah.
Is
What
that
do you
the
do to
question?
avoid? Yes, that's. What do you do to avoid pod fade? Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's okay to pod fade, but get real with oneself, right? So ask yourself, do I really find joy in this? Is it still fun? And is it a matter of just finding time and committing to that? Or do you really just want to shut it all down? If you want to shut it all down, then just I tell my son, if you're going to quit something, do it with honor and respect. So that means, hey everybody, I've come to a decision, la la la. If you want to still keep in touch with me, email me here, but otherwise this is going to be sunset. Now, to keep going, if you still enjoy it, which I do, I ask myself, well, I want to get the information out. I'm on a different timetable than everybody else. And I think that the for me, you have to figure out your why. Why are you podcasting? And it better not be because you want to make a lot of money and you want to make money now, because that's not going to happen, generally speaking. And so it has to be that you still love it for some reason. And I think that's what keeps people going. And I think that people who have done it for a while, and people at any stage, what am I saying? I think as long as you love doing it, do it on your timetable, because you're an independent podcaster. You can do whatever you want. You just have to always keep your listeners updated as to what kind of vibe you're setting. Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can come at this from a few different angles, because over time, I think it evolves like anything.
Yeah.
So when I first launched the podcast, it was like first 10, 20 episodes, I'm trying to figure out who am I going to book on the show. I was recording and then publishing weekly. So I'm going through this cycle of trying to fill the pipeline, but then I'd kind of slow down and find myself, oh my gosh, I have no show for next week. And then I'd like go hard again and book a bunch of guests, record. And then I say, okay, well, now I have like 10 episodes, so I'm good for 10 weeks. So it was this like ebb and flow. And then in the first year, going to conferences, as Lee had referenced, it's like she was on stage giving her talk about, journalism and how that applies to podcasting. And meanwhile, I was just running around like a crazy person trying to record with whoever I could, which were attendees of the conference, because there are other podcasters that were super interesting, other speakers who were super interesting. I interviewed wrestler Colt Cabana there. And I love that. Like, you go to one event and you can bank 7 or 8 recordings, and then I'm good for like 2 months. So that's one way to keep it going. I think the other thing is focus on what you enjoy. Like, what really kept me going week after week is that when I hit stop record, I say, wow, I really enjoyed having the conversation, asking the questions, like the research and preparation paid off, and I learned something. And that I hope that the listener will come along with me for that ride. of learning. But I truly believe that being a podcaster makes me a better financial advisor. So it makes me better at my day job. I'm learning like so many things from really smart, accomplished people, and that's fun. But when you look at your podcast, it's like, what are the things you do not enjoy? Like, I think I edited myself the first 100+ episodes. So every week I'm recording, I have to edit the show. But I did finally come to the realization, actually, a listener who I met in person in New York City for a drink, he like had this look of disbelief on his face when he heard that I was editing the show. He's like, "You edit your own podcast? Are you crazy?" And so then I said, all right, well, let me see if I can outsource the editing. And that helped a lot. So it's like, and it doesn't have to be super expensive. I mean, I had like no budget. I was doing everything on a shoestring. But if you can outsource the things that you don't like doing, that can help you to keep going. And then I guess if you go another extreme, in the most recent iteration of Inspired Money, where I'm doing the live stream, I used artificial intelligence to outline 100 episodes. So I have a planned schedule of 100 episodes, 100 topics, attach the date to those episodes. And that allows me to plan ahead, have like a recurring theme, really have an have an arc of my 100 episodes, which keeps me going too, because I have this schedule and I know what's coming up for like the next few weeks, the next month. I can book guests way in advance. And when people say they're not available, I can send them a list of, here are episodes over the next 2 months that I think that you'd be great for. Are you available on these dates? So there are many ways to go about it, but I think those are some of my experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. AI. We're living in the future, Andy. Wild. And we are. I mean, we're having an event in May here at Podbean on AI. And I mean, like, we just launched Podbean AI, which will write your show notes, and audio optimization and your transcripts and your chapter markers. It's crazy. We're living in the future. And I think, utilizing AI or leaning on it, not 100% just saying, okay, I'm going to give it, full autonomy to create the content of my show, but utilizing just the framework of that to be able to work with, and takes a lot of that mental strain off of planning, and 100 episodes is like 2 years, right? So you've got the next 2 years kind of, well, I guess now it's been 6 months, but like, kind of mapped out, so you don't have to think about it as much, and you can really just be in the joy of what you do enjoy, which is great. And I love what you said about outsourcing editing. For everybody out there, there's, you either love editing or you don't love editing. That's kind of I think that's maybe the thing that people say about it, because editing is something where, the people who love it want to dive in and, edit out all the tiny little nuances. And if you don't love it, it can be so draining and just take so much energy, I think, from the rest of your process. So that's a really great tip as well, in terms of just being able to cut out what really doesn't serve you and serve what excites you and keeps you wanting to move your podcast forward. I love that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually don't hate editing.
Oh.
I just hate that it takes so long. Like, I don't mind doing it, except like 2 hours later, I'm like, I wish I didn't have to edit. And then as a side note, my then 15-year-old last year, her summer job was editing podcasts, because I had some friends who are in the financial podcasting space and they needed an editor. And I asked my daughter, I said, do you want to edit some podcasts and earn some money? She was like, yeah, sure. So it was kind of cool. She turned into a podcast editor for the summer and got experience. And the funny thing was, she would, after she'd edit, I'd just do like a quick listen through to see how she did. And then I'd ask her, what did you think? She's like, well, for me, it's really boring content, but I'm learning so much. I learned about like mothers and finance. I said, well, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, maybe I'm speaking for myself. Editing is not my strong suit, but it's important to really focus on the thing that is going to give you time, not take away from it. And I love that example. And also, editing is such a great skill. If you love it, you can even have a career in podcasting. So it's definitely something that, when there is a facet of podcasting that lights you up, don't ignore that, go with it and see what, where it can take you. We have a lot of podcasters and podcast service businesses that we've spoken to here on Podcasting Smarter and through our events here at Podbean. And, it's really coming from a lot of the time of them having a successful show or knowing, hey, I'm pretty good at this editing thing, and other people starting to ask them to edit, and then, a business takes off. So definitely don't discount that as well, which is really, really important. And Andy, I want to talk to you and Lee next about monetization, which is kind of tangentially related to, your podcast genre, which is personal finance. So, I'd love to hear from both of you about monetization tips and strategy that you've utilized both for your podcast, but also that you've seen other podcasters within the AAPI community utilize, and really what have you seen podcasters be successful with? We have a lot of monetization built in here at Podbean, but I just love talking about it as well from a community perspective.
Yeah, for monetization, I can give advice on how to monetize, and probably in my experience, how not to do it. I can look at it from both sides. I've found that for my podcast, probably I should be more aggressive in trying to do outreach and find sponsorships. But I think that most of my monetization has come from affiliate relationships. And the key there is finding things that actually align with your listeners' interests. So, as an example, I interviewed a guy named Brian Winch, who is in Canada, and he built his business picking up litter in commercial parking lots. I don't think he went to college. He started this when he was like out of high school and turned it into like an $800,000 per year business. Just picking up litter. This is just like napkins that get thrown out in the pizzeria parking lot or a supermarket. It's like coffee cups.
Wild.
So he's like, it's not that much garbage. He's like, it's all little stuff. It's wrappers. And he goes in with his gear in a garbage bag and then throws it out into the dumpster. And he does that depending on the lot, certain number of times per week, might be daily. And then he sends out teams to do that too. He then created like a manual, a book to teach people how do you set up your own litter pickup business. And I've had him as a guest on my show twice. And that book, I never expected would actually sell that many, but I'll get affiliate checks in my PayPal account. It's like $100 here, $100 there. And then I look at the end of the year, I'm like, oh, there's over $1,000 being sold from his manual. So the key is like, if you have a guest on your show that has a product or service that actually aligns with the interests of your listenership, they will buy. And I'm not even pushing it hard. I'm not like advertising his book. It just, I have the link there. I think I mentioned that there's going to be an affiliate link, and people click through. So that's worked really well. I think for a lot of independent podcasters, one does need to do outreach.
For sure.
Looking at your network, going to different podcasting events can help a lot. Going to Podcast Movement, going to Podfest, and meeting the people in the exhibitor hall who can be potential sponsors of your show. I think having those conversations are really important, and to explore if you have a niche podcast and there are companies that do want to get in front of your audience. It doesn't have to be as big an audience as you think. I think that there are opportunities there, and you can get creative. You can just reach out to small businesses in your area, and if there is an alignment, I think that you can make a pitch, and you should make a pitch.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Andy, I want to start $1 million trash.
Right?
That's so cool.
I have 3 kids to put through college, and
an extra,
they're in high school and middle school right now. There are days when I'm like,
could I just,
maybe I should just go pick up litter, like just, for an hour in the morning before I start my work.
Well, I mean, that's wild though. I mean, $800,000 a year from picking up litter in business parking lots. It must be a lot of parking lots. I'm going to have to go back and find that specific episode. Maybe we'll drop it here in in the show
I
notes.
like the environmental part too, right?
Yeah.
Because he's cleaning up the community. He's
Wild.
making it look better.
Yeah.
So there's
No,
it's like a win-win.
that's wild. But I think it's also really important as well to recognize and remember that, a lot of this podcast sponsorship, it's not going to be like, okay, everyone, I have 1 million downloads now. And of course, if you have those 1 million downloads at Podbean, we have all the ad solutions built in, even if you have, 100 or 500 downloads, let alone 500,000 or 1 million, right? You can do DAI, you can insert ads into your own podcast, right? And it charges per 1,000 impressions like $1 if you insert your own ad. And so you can go out into your own community, and it doesn't have to be necessarily download dependent, right? You can say, hey, I want to put this package together, or hey, I'd love to have you on my show. If you do have a link, I love your product, or I love your story. I mean, gosh, that's really important as well. And I think in terms of monetization, there's so many ways to think about it. We have so much ad tech built in at Podbean, which I love to nerd out and talk about all day, every day. So we talked about it in April, and I think we're going to talk about it again in June at our events. And, we have a whole academy on it. But, a lot of podcast sponsorship for smaller podcasts or podcasts that are, really specific for a niche, it's very relational. It's very relational. So, I think this is also similar to what you were saying in terms of guesting as well. It's just about putting yourself out there and not being afraid to, face that rejection. The worst thing they're going to say is, hey, no, it's not a fit, or it's not the right time, or something like that. But if they say yes, you never know what's going to happen from it. So I think that that's a really great point as well. Yeah. Lee, do you have anything you want to add on the monetization side?
Just a couple of things.
Mm.
One, ask yourself, do you want to monetize with ads and sponsorship? Because maybe you don't. I know on a couple of my shows, I don't. I don't want any ads whatsoever. Then you also want to think about the vibe of the ads. Do you want to, you can do the dynamic ad insertion, or you can do a host read ad in your copy, which is my vibe on my show, personally. And then you can also monetize because you have a podcast. So maybe you don't put an ad there, but maybe you have a service and you advertise your service on your show, and your business is the sponsor. And that's great because it's tax deductible, because you're going to come up with an ad rate sheet and bill your company, right? And
Totally.
then right, and then the other thing too is, uh Andy talks about being an affiliate, and I will say, you have to have kind of a following to do that, because otherwise there could be tumbleweeds. I remember when I first started, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be an affiliate for all this, and then Amazon shut me down because nobody was buying anything. So just keep that in mind. And then the other thing about it is, just reach out. On my hyper local news podcast, I went to my favorite diner and I said, hey, I had a relationship like they mentioned, and I said, would you like to and I said, would you like to advertise on the show? And they said yes. And so, and they have the best French fries in the city, I believe. But it's really about reaching out. And it matches. You want to match, like Andy was saying. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we had a podcast a while ago on Podcasting Smarter that is all about Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they do really well with that podcast. And so, I think that there is a market for everyone, and so for every podcast as well. And I want to talk to you both next about the Golden Crane Podcast Awards. So obviously, these are the awards that the Asian American Podcaster Association created and give out. But, considering that you founded the awards, I'd love for you both to speak about them, because I want to hear, from both of you in the first person about the awards, but also, what are the qualities that you believe set apart award-winning content, right? What are you looking for? And for everybody out there who's thinking, oh, if somebody has an award-winning podcast, what's the secret? In a way, what makes that content different, or what makes those winning podcasts stand out?
So there is no difference other than those showrunners put themselves forward in the submission form. They applied. And anyone can do it, not to say that you'll win, but here's the secret that you don't realize. People complain, they have a scarcity mindset and they complain about, well, there's a fee. Well, it costs to live, people, and it costs to give out awards. And we are one of the actual shows that actually gives you an award. We send it out, and the cost is in the shipping as well. Here's the thing, though, it's great to nominate yourself for an award, because what happens is most likely you will then get the designation of nominee or nominated show, and that can alone open doors. But that doesn't happen if you don't fill out that form, whether it's a type form, a Google form, all the other apps out there submittable, I think. But anyway, step forward. That's what sets you apart. And then you get into the next level, which is, well, how's your audio quality? How's your content? Are you providing value? Like, do we, and the other thing too is along this line, we are a judge based show, awards show, meaning it's not a popularity contest. You don't have to go out and say, oh, vote for my show, because that is not, I don't think that that's an accurate representation of quality. It shows that you know how to reach out to a lot of people, but it doesn't set an evil playing ground, an even playing ground for all showrunners based on quality, right? And Andy, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I will credit Lee with having a very high standard for quality, not only in the judging and the process for which shows are judged, but even the quality of the award. Like, it's a solid crystal trophy, and it's beautiful. So when awardees receive it, they're super excited, one, to win the award, but then when they physically hold it, they're like, oh my gosh, this thing is hefty.
3 pounds.
And that's why the shipping is so expensive. um, but I just want to take a step back. Like, the Golden Crane Awards, really Lee's idea and execution, and a thought that started during the pandemic. So the first two award shows were virtual. We did them as Zoom, as like a Zoom show. And what's crazy is that Lee was very adamant about this should be a black tie event. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to wear a tuxedo when I'm sitting at home on Zoom, but she got me to do it. And when we opened up the Zoom browser and had all the attendees there, and everybody was dressed to the nines, like, it was crazy. It did add to the experience. People were excited to be there. It was festive. It was something that was very fun and different to do during the pandemic when everybody was locked at home and not going out. It's like, I'm going to get dressed up. And yeah, guys were wearing bow ties. Girls were wearing beautiful dresses, did their hair, which was like the opposite of most of our Zoom calls, right? And then the experiment was last year. We had a dinner. So we had a hybrid event at a restaurant in Chinatown, a banquet dinner where we had live attendees, some who traveled from Canada in the West Coast. They came from far away, which was very impressive. And then we had people online. So that was insanity, because we're like a very small team trying to execute a half in-person, half online.
That's a lot of work.
There were a lot of
It was the most imperfect,
speed bumps.
hybrid show one could possibly execute. But hey, you know what? Done is better than perfect. We did our best with what we had, and it was a memorable experience, a evening out.
And like many Asian restaurants that are family run and have the whole family there, like, we enlisted our kids. Our kids were helping.
I love that. No, that's so good. I think it's also one of those things where, in terms of creating that community, people want to feel like, oh, we're going to something and we have familiar people there. And, I think when you make something a formal event, it's taken a little bit more seriously. And so, honoring a lot of those podcasts of people who have done so much work and, taken the time to create a beautiful podcast, let alone submit it. So in terms of, what content really stands out, what have you guys seen in terms of the shows that you've loved that maybe have won awards, won Golden Crane podcast awards, but what are some of the shows that you've seen that are outstanding? Yeah.
Lee?
I'm just like, where's the list of winners?
Right, fair enough. No, but off the top of your head, no pressure.
I don't have the list of winners in front of me, so I just want to say that what I've been really impressed by is that there are many independent shows.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been some that have bigger teams and they're backed by, some either corporate or public radio. There are those shows too. But there are a lot of independent shows that are doing really impressive things with sound design. Like there's music in the background, like the production is super high and it's just like one person or a really small team executing that, which is impressive.
Like Stories with Sapphire, amazing. She does everything herself, and the production is fantastic. And not only the production, but the content, the stories that she shares I'm stumbling for words because it's such a good example, a great example. And then you have the show Self Evident. It's called Self Evident Asian America's Stories. That's also highly produced, but with a very small team. And the thing is, if we could impart to independent podcasters, is there is no reason why you can't have a well produced show, even with you yourself and you making it. It's if you have the right microphone and you take the time to set it up and interview your guests, if you have guests, and throw in some music and at some highlighted points, if that's your thing, or outsource it. It's not that hard to do, honestly. And then the other thing too is we're the only awards show which wants to and seeks out kid podcasters to help them keep going. And so we have some, I think, Little Mind Chats and Serafina Speaks. They got their awards mostly because they were consistent and because they put themselves forward. They nominated, or their parents did. You know what I mean? Oh, opportunity. And so because here, the other thing is, children, we love to encourage kids to do this because there is no barrier. There's no gatekeeper, like we were saying,
Yeah.
which says you have to be a minimum of X age, right? That's not the case these days. And these shows I'm mentioning, they were some of the winners from the 2020 awards. And then we give award for like best cover art and that kind of thing. So it's not only about editing and content. So have I answered the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's really helpful, I think, for everybody out there who's thinking like, oh gosh, I think in a lot of ways when we think about media, especially as media creators, there's a misconception that you need to be picked versus you need to pick yourself. You need to submit yourself. You need to elect yourself. And one of the great things about podcasting and how egalitarian it is, how equal it is across the board, is that, it's up to the podcaster, right? How much do you want to put in? What guests are you going to reach out to? What brands are you going to reach out to? If you're tired of editing, what editors are you going to reach out to? And especially also, when we're thinking about community, and especially as AAPI podcasters, I think you both exemplify this in terms of, what is the community that you're going to be part of and build yourself or contribute to building, that's also going to help boost your show and boost your enthusiasm in podcasting as well. We're almost out of time, but before we wrap up, I kind of want to ask you both, in terms of the AAPI podcasting community, what do you both feel will help further the reach and impact, both within the community and from the general overall podcasting audience and community? Lee, you want to go first?
Okay, so let me see if I understand the question. I'm just a simple person. You want to know what the future impact? What? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Huh?
Yeah. What do you think the AAPI podcasting community can do to further its reach and impact?
what can we do to further our reach?
Mhm.
It's just, we have to just get the word out that it exists.
Mm.
There are a lot of people still to this day, even though we have 700. And listen, when you look at it, and Andy explains this very well, so jump in if I'm messing it up, which is the population statistically, Asian Americans are a very small piece of the pie. So when we say that we have almost 800 shows in our
It's a
directory,
big deal.
that's a bigger number than you think it is, than it seems. And so getting the word out is important. And because there's still, my then going back, my point is that some people still don't even know it exists, and then when they find out, they're very excited. And so to have future impact, I think, is just keep on getting the word out. I didn't say that as eloquently as I could have, but Andy, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, my thought is that as an independent creator, it's often a very solitary exercise. Like we're sitting in our basement or we're sitting in our closet and creating a show. And then you look at social media and inevitably you see what others are doing. And like I'm like, oh my man, how come this show is like growing like a hockey stick? And I'm here like pushing publish every week. And it's just slow, steady, organic growth, which is not a bad thing, but it feels like the grass is greener on the other side. So I think that it's about community. Um, it's about collaboration because the power to connect with other podcasters, whether it's in the Asian American community or beyond, there's just so much potential to share resources, knowledge, support one another. And I think the power of collaboration on a cross cultural project or initiative, it can be extremely impactful. It can be huge. So I think that that's how we as podcasters can make a difference. It's like we grow together, and the what's the saying? Like rising tide lifts all
Yeah,
ships.
that's all.
I think that that makes that's where like a lot of progress is made. So it's look for potential collaborations with other podcasters. Um, yeah, don't think of other podcasters as competition. It's we can work together and expose our show's audience to somebody else's show's audience, and then we can grow. We can cross pollinate and grow together. And I think that that's something that we can do as a group and as creators to,
Yeah, I
And
love that.
also,
I guess, grow faster.
that's one of the greatest ways to actually grow your show, is to cross pollinate. Oh, and that was the other thing. When it comes to monetization, you can swap airtime with other shows
Oh
in
yeah.
relation to, and do it on such a basis of how many listeners one show has versus another. So like
Yep.
Andy's show's got a bazillion listeners compared to like one of my shows. So he would get to run more ads based on his numbers, you know what I mean? So that's
Yeah,
another thing.
absolutely.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, that's a really big one as well. Just swapping impressions with other shows, whether you're exchanging money or not. I think that's a really big way that podcasters can also cross promote their shows. Well, it's been such a pleasure. Lee, Andy, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to read our brief outro and then we'll wrap up today. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So thank you everyone for joining us at Podcasting Smarter for our May live event. Identity as Influence, Harnessing Your AAPI Roots to Carve Out Your Podcast Success, featuring Lee Uehara and Andy Wang of the Asian American Podcasters Association, Inspired Money, and the Golden Crane Podcast Awards. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions like this one with top podcasters. We also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast, so make sure to check that out as well. This event is one of the many resources and events Podbean offers free of charge to empower you to launch and succeed in your podcasting journey. We also have some great events coming up And especially in May, we've got a really great event on AI and how to use AI to market your podcast. So stay tuned for that. And if you joined late or want to have another listen to this conversation, you can listen here on YouTube, on Podbean's YouTube channel, and we'll have excerpts on the Podcasting Smarter podcast. Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetizing platform and home to over 640,000 podcasts. To start your podcast, head over to podbean.com today. And if you have any questions, you can always email us at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody, and stay tuned for more podcasting tips and best practices. Happy podcasting. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Norma Jean. Thank you, Podbean. And thank you to all the listeners and viewers.